Hello everyone, today I'm going to do something that I'm sure no one else on the internet has done yet, and talk about the many questions surrounding the inevitable upcoming 3D Mario game for Switch 2, including why it hasn't been released or even announced yet. When I did something similar for the Switch 2 upgrade of Super Mario Bros. Wonder not that long ago, that was then announced a few weeks later. So if nothing else, I'm making this video to tempt fate and force Mario's next mainline adventure to be announced in no time. All jokes aside, I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at approaching the impossible task of predicting the actions of the world's least predictable company in a somewhat level-headed way, so I hope you'll appreciate my ideas. The first thing I want to emphasize is what a unique position the Switch 2 is currently in as far as its Mario lineup goes. Unless a brand new Mario game is announced in a February 2026 Direct and then released within a few months, which seems extremely unlikely, the Switch 2 will soon be the first Nintendo console not to receive an exclusive Mario platformer in its first year on the market. From the NES to the original Switch, just about every previous Nintendo console either launched with a new mainline Mario game or had one release a few months or at most a year after launch. And apart from the Game Boy Advance and DS, which both launched with remakes, the other Mario launch titles were also brand new mainline games. So this brings us back to the question of why. What made Nintendo change up this strategy after decades of success? Could it be that a 3D Mario simply couldn't have been finished in time for the launch of the Switch 2? Well, even accounting for the longer dev times of modern video games, it's been 8 years since the release of Super Mario Odyssey, which also happens to be the best-selling 3D Mario game of all time. And I don't think Nintendo has been twiddling their thumbs in regards to 3D Mario ever since, even ignoring Bowser's Fury and the many Mario ports. Now, the recent release of Donkey Kong Bonanza does complicate things, because we know for a fact that a large part of Nintendo EPD Tokyo, the 3D Mario team, worked on that game, so that would explain what they've been doing since Bowser's Fury. But key developers like Odyssey producer Yoshiaki Koizumi didn't work on Bonanza or any other recent game for that matter. So I think it's reasonable to assume that a 3D Mario game is being worked on by a separate team as we speak. And I don't doubt that had Nintendo wanted to, a 3D Mario could have been ready for the launch of the Switch 2, just like it was for so many previous Nintendo consoles. As opposed to anything to do with the game itself, I think a large part of the reason behind the delay of the new 3D Mario comes down to the games the Switch 2 did launch with. Remember how the original Switch launched with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which pulled the Twilight Princess by starting development for the previous console, but ending up releasing on both simultaneously? Well, we know for a fact that the same thing basically happened with Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. Okay, sure, those didn't release on the original Switch due to hardware limitations, but they still started development on the console and weren't made to be the Switch 2's eventual launch titles. And I think this decision, delaying these two games to the point where they ended up releasing on a different console altogether, is what in turn delayed the next 3D Mario. So if Nintendo were ever planning on launching the Switch 2 with an original Mario adventure, that game's development was slowed down when it became clear that Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza would need some extra time and horsepower. Now, you might rightfully wonder, why wouldn't Nintendo release both of these games and the new mainline Mario adventure within the span of a few months? Well, this comes down to the overlapping appeals of these games. The Mario Kart franchise has become so popular in recent years that it has possibly become the main thing Mario is known for among general audiences above even platforming. So having the Switch 2 launch with Mario Kart World fulfills the same purpose that launching previous consoles with Mario platformers did, of getting what will almost certainly be one of the most popular titles on the console on there as soon as possible to attract the largest amount of early adopters. And for the people who are more of a fan of the gameplay of Mario games as opposed to Mario as a brand, well, look no further than Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is kind of a direct sequel to Super Mario Odyssey in all but name. With his prominent inclusion in the Mario movie and theme park, and now this big new game release, it's clear that Nintendo is trying to make Donkey Kong one of their flagship mascots, meaning they have a lot riding on Bonanza's success. And releasing another likely somewhat similar 3D platformer tied to a much more popular character would have undermined this effort completely. Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza have all the features that a 3D Mario game has as far as its launch title suitability goes, whilst exhibiting a much broader appeal than one single game ever could. So although this may not be how fans perceive it, I think in the eyes of Nintendo, from a business standpoint, releasing a new mainline Mario so shortly after these two titles would be completely redundant. Now, looking beyond the launch window, I think the reason the game isn't being released like right now, during the holiday season, isn't just because it could have then still possibly affected DK Bonanza's appeal, but also because of how crowded this time of year has inadvertently become for Nintendo. Pokémon Legends ZA, Hyrule Warriors, Kirby Air Riders, and Metroid Prime 4 have or will all be released within 2 months of each other. And the thing about all of these games, except for obviously Pokémon, is that none of them are guaranteed to be huge releases that will definitely sell a lot of copies. So had Nintendo released their big blockbuster 3D Mario game this season, it would have almost certainly buried the other releases and prevented them from potentially becoming breakout hits. Okay, so that's why the game hasn't been released or announced yet, but as for when I think the next 3D Mario will actually release, it would have to be next year's holiday season, right? That's when Nintendo usually releases their big system seller titles, and since they've already gotten Mario Kart and Pokémon out of the way, I don't think they'd release an Animal Crossing in the winter, and a new Smash Bros or Zelda title seems unlikely. Yeah, I think Mario would make perfect sense here. So that's the main question of the video answered to the best of my abilities, but I'm not quite done speculating just yet, because I want to pose another question. What will this new 3D Mario be like as a game? Although in the eyes of outside observers, Mario's mainline games might seem repetitive or samey, I think it's clear to longtime fans that the franchise survives through the innovation and evolution of its core mechanics. Odyssey is nothing like 3D World, which is nothing like Galaxy, which is nothing like Sunshine, etc. The few times that the series did receive a more iterative sequel was either when both games were on the same console or following a shorter than average dev cycle, which clearly isn't what we're in for now. So all this is to say, I think the idea that Super Mario Switch 2, or whatever it'll be called, will be a direct sequel to Super Mario Odyssey isn't realistic. The existence of Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is basically an Odyssey sequel in and of itself, makes it all the more clear to me that Mario will be moving in a different direction. Though in a way, it could be argued that it will continue evolving in the same direction, if that makes any sense. See, there's this idea that gained popularity since the release of Bowser's Fury that Nintendo is planning on making a full-on exploration-based 3D Mario game with a single continuous open world. The reason this would be in line with previous games is because, starting with 3D World and followed by Odyssey and Bowser's Fury, every recent 3D Mario game has been more open than the last. And people believe Bowser's Fury was a way for the developers to test the waters with this sort of idea. This could explain why the new game never materialized on the original Switch, since running a detailed open world at 60 FPS is something the older console likely couldn't handle, which is also why Mario Kart World moved to the Switch too. But speaking of Mario Kart World, between it and obviously Zelda, and even arguably Donkey Kong, loads of Nintendo franchises have been moving towards more of an open world structure in the past few years. And although I'd say this approach has worked tremendously in some cases, it has also undeniably been controversial in others. Nintendo is known for their innovative and very diverse types of games, so I think it would be a shame if all of their franchises slowly moved towards a samey open world structure. Having said that, I would undeniably be fascinated to see what a traditional Mario game in an open world environment would play like. Bowser's Fury is genuinely up there among my favorite Mario games due to its blend of precise linear design and open world exploration. So the idea of having its structure be applied to a full-scale game is definitely appealing. Still, if I had to put money on it, I'd say the Switch 2's mainline Mario won't be fully open world. I think its structure will fall more in line with that of previous 3D Mario games. Okay, now let me make a bit of a fun but also very pointless prediction. The next 3D Mario will feature some new way for Mario to defeat enemies and interact with the world other than jumping. From punching and kicking in Super Mario 64, to Flood in Sunshine, spin jumping in the Galaxy games, and throwing Cappy in Odyssey, most 3D Marios have made the player's primary way of dealing with obstacles something other than precisely jumping on top of them, which can be quite finicky in 3D. The only exceptions are of course Super Mario 3D Land and World, which feature more straightforward controls and terrain that make it easier to line up a jump to hit an enemy, but also loads of power-ups that still allow you to do so without jumping. But although those are some of my favorite Mario games, I know for a fact that Nintendo is aware that most people prefer the more open style, so I think along with that, a new way to defeat enemies will be introduced. And if the previous games are anything to go by, this may also be tied into the game's one-off companion character. On the other hand, something that I think is basically impossible to predict is the game's name and theme. I honestly find it hilarious how often people come up with the most basic, obvious titles for Mario sequels, like Super Mario Journey or Super Mario Adventure. Journey and Adventure are basically just more generic synonyms of Odyssey, so that would be like if the sequel to Super Mario Galaxy was called Super Mario Space. Sure, sometimes Nintendo goes for something pretty obvious, which is how I accidentally predicted Mario Kart World's name for example, but looking at Mario's mainline lineup so far, from Sunshine to Odyssey and Wonder, the defining idea of each Mario game can range from simple to obscure. Like, it may have been easy to forget after all these years, but I remember seeing Odyssey's title for the first time nearly 9 years ago and struggling to understand it, so the next title may feel just as strange. Now, one thing I should definitely address is this idea that the next 3D Mario will in fact finally be Super Mario Galaxy 3. I think it's undeniable that even before the announcement of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, the Galaxy sub-theme of Mario games always stood out from the rest as being maybe slightly more iconic. Like, I've never seen anyone genuinely argue for the plausibility of the next Mario game being Super Mario Sunshine 2 or Super Mario 3D Country, but Galaxy 3 has been something fans have clamored for. I think this partially comes from a tendency of general audiences to expect any entertainment product that has a sequel to become a trilogy, because somehow duologies feel inherently incomplete. And then because the second Mario movie is Galaxy themed for no apparent reason, and because both Galaxy games were re-released for Mario's 40th anniversary, if Galaxy 3 were to ever become a thing, it would have to be now. But, well, I don't think that's happening. I don't doubt that Nintendo's designers could do loads more stuff with the gravity mechanics of a Galaxy game in this day and age, and I'm sure they're aware of the staying power of the Galaxy brand. But as I've mentioned several times now, Nintendo's games are all about being as innovative as possible, often favoring bold new ideas above doing what the fans would most like to see. So even though we seem to be in an era of endless 2000s gaming nostalgia in terms of remakes and remasters and whatever, I would be very surprised if Nintendo would take this so far as to make their next flagship Mario title be a sequel to a set of games that are older than many of their current day fans. Remember that the target audience for Mario games is still mostly kids, and even with the games being re-released this year, Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 just don't mean as much to people who didn't grow up with them. So although I'm not ruling out the possibility, it would be very surprising to me if, let's say this time next year, we're all playing Super Mario Galaxy 3. In summary, I think Nintendo could have had a 3D Mario release alongside the Switch 2, but decided to prioritize giving some breathing room to Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, which were delayed to the point where they became the system's launch titles. And the same applies to the cluster of games releasing this holiday season. Instead, I believe we'll get a new 3D Mario around the holiday season of 2026. It won't feature fully open world exploration, but will have some new central gimmick that allows you to easily interact with enemies, and as usual, its theme and name will be something slightly unusual. And that's all I wanted to talk about for today. Of course, if you disagree with any of the blatant guesswork I did throughout this video, or have some ideas of your own, please let me know by leaving a comment. While you're down there, maybe also consider leaving a like or subscribing. I also have a public Discord server linked in the description, and if you'd like to get early access to my videos, maybe consider signing up for a YouTube channel membership. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye!